Ladies and gentlemen, let's get ready for the Wot Supp podcast. With your host, Stu, OG Industry Shannon, and Will warren-davey, new school formulator extraordinaire. We're talking all things supplements with insiders, athletes, experts, and more. So sit back, relax, and prepare to find out what's up.
Guys, welcome to another episode of the Wot Supp podcast. Now, what I'm going to do for this intro is I'm going to do what I'm going to call a raw intro. Let's see if you can guess who my guest is. We have... Oh, I'm about to say his name. All right, well, I'm just going to give it away. We have Joseph Mencel, Big Joe from Massive Joe's. Everyone knows who he is. We've had him on before, and we're doing Big Joseph Mencel, episode 2. Welcome to the podcast, Joe.
Thank you for having me back, Stu. I appreciate it. And thank you for the customized intro as well.
No problems. And of course, we've got my co-host, Will warren-davey, on board. We're very excited for this one, Will. We love our chats with Joe.
We do, mate. They've always been really well received too, because I think people walk away from any bit of content we tend to record with Joe, and likewise that you're putting out in particular lately, Joe, it seems to be, really quite value packed. Like we had some really, really great responses to part 1, where we went through a lot of the business side of supplements as well. And we delved into a lot of the, we got geeked out a bit on subs too, which is nice, but we definitely covered a lot of the business side of things as well. And I guess some, advice for punters and so on, people starting out in the game, which is really cool. We've got a really diverse podcast in episode 1. So looking forward to having you here for part 2, mate, to see what rabbit holes we can explore this time.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. I'm super excited to be back. We had the first time I was on this show, there was a lot of positive feedback about what we discussed. And I think, between the three of us, we have such a vast range of experience in the supplement industry, from retail to distribution to importing to manufacturing to branding to marketing to dealing with athletes. It's the whole broad spectrum of everything in the industry. So I think for the listeners and the viewers who are particularly interested in the behind the scenes workings of the industry, they're quite valuable episodes. And then Will, when I had you on my podcast, on the Fitness Times Business podcast, so much positive feedback on that. You sharing your very raw, started from the bottom story behind Primabolics and kind of even earlier than Primabolics, how you got to starting Primabolics. So many people found so much value in that episode, and I think really appreciated the authenticity and the vulnerability that you showed. So, I always know when I sit down with you guys that the chats are very real, and I really appreciate that, and I think the listeners and the viewers do as well.
Thank you very much, mate. That was a phenomenal piece of content. A lot of people reached out after that as well on a few platforms, and same here. We had some really, really great responses too. So, and I think an area to probably delve into to start would be, I suppose a lot of people drew parallels from their own struggles as to what we covered, both in our first episode and in yours as well, where a lot of people do struggle with that initial foot in the door, trying to get. To have the leap of faith, I suppose, to get their own, whatever their, pursue whatever their area of passion is, or turn something into more than just a hobby. And that real, taking that first step, that leap of faith into taking risks. And we're very risk averse people, particularly lately. We've seen a huge amount of fluctuation in our day-to-day life, what it looks like, what we can and can't do. And I see that people are probably even more risk averse than ever now. And I think, unfortunately, risk is the founder of innovation in a lot of cases, though. So I suppose that was a great area. If we want to start unpacking something, maybe looking into, I suppose, even in this new climate that we're operating in with a lot of uncertainty, how do you sort of approach risks that might not be as easy to calculate as they used to be?
Yeah, look, man, it's so many things have changed so rapidly over the last 2 years. We kind of the beginnings of the pandemic. I mean, it's called COVID-19, right? It started in November 2019 in China, and then moved to Italy, and that's where it just exploded from. I was actually in Italy in November 2019, funnily enough. So I might.
It was your fault, mate.
I might have been case number one. Who knows? But yeah, and here we are in November 2021, and I think that there's been so many changes in all industries, in all businesses over the last couple of years, and obviously in the supplement industry, we've had our own little pieces of exposure to different flow-on effects of the pandemic, and we've had a lot of rapid changes in the industry as well. I think there's a couple of things that I have seen over the last couple of years that I think have changed more rapidly than we would have expected them to. And I think I'll start with the positive, because I think on the positive, the pandemic really has kind of forced people to take their health a little bit more seriously. It's kind of forced them to go, especially the way that COVID really is quite dangerous to people who have underlying medical conditions or just aren't generally in good health. If you're generally in good health and you get COVID, most of the time you're going to be fine. If you're not in good health, then most of the time you're going to run into issues. So I think that in the back of people's minds has kind of encouraged them to take their health and fitness a little bit more seriously. And I've seen that, from a sales perspective, we've seen a big shift to more of the general health type supplements, your fish oils, your multivitamins, your superfood supplements, as opposed to, your pre-workouts, your aminos, your performance-based supplements. That demand's still there, but I've definitely seen an increase in the demand and then the flow on sales for those more general health and wellbeing supplements. So I think that's probably the positive that I've seen come out of the last couple of years. I think the negative, and something that we're really starting to see the effects of right now, increase in raw material prices and the logistical nightmare around importing and moving products around the world, which are the negative side of the pandemic over the last couple of years.
Yeah, that's been a remarkable one, I think, and we're lucky in that Stu, you in particular, and myself, I think we're having daily chats to our factories at the moment with. They're going, look, we're holding off on a price rise, holding off, but it's going to happen. It's going to be huge. And it's quite a remarkable time, because we were lucky enough to have Troy on with International Protein on a previous episode, sort of at the very beginning of the murmurs of the price rises, just to try and work with, I suppose, get the word out to retailers and go, hey, start thinking about this. We're starting to see some pressure. We're starting to see supply bottlenecks. We're starting to see some international freight lead times blow out, some costings blow out. Let's just start having a chat. And fast forward now, and we're lucky, like you said, Joe, we've got people here. We've got front of house, retail, web order. We've also got distribution, manufacturing. So we see it in all different tiers of the industry and how it flows down. So, and we have a lot of not only store owners who'll get value from listening about, I guess, some impacts you might have faced in your business model, but also just general consumers who are listening, who like this podcast, who we can go, give them a bit of an idea as to what's happening on the back end that they might not be aware of. To also, if nothing else, give probably the retailer a pat on the back for a bit of stress handling that they're probably about to endure for the next few months. So
I got to ask one thing though before I ask you this, Joe. Yeah. How many do you sell vitamin D, and how many bottles are you selling a week at the moment?
Hey, let me tell you, Stu, when I think it was probably towards the middle of last year where there were those studies that came out that were like vitamin D is I can't remember if it was like it would prevent you from getting COVID, or if you got COVID, it would stop it being so bad that, there was all this kind of talk
I think the idea that came out of that was that it was going to reduce the risks of this cytokine storm happening. So
yeah,
the exaggerated inflammation response, which I think is probably the great fear and what really makes COVID more serious if you have that that kind of response. So we definitely saw an increase in vitamin D sales.
Yeah, well, we saw an increase and then we couldn't get it. Sold all of the vitamin D and then went to go reorder more, and they're like, "Oh, we're sold out for the next 3 months." And I was like, "Oh, okay."
Yeah,
nice while it lasted.
But what I wanted to ask you, Joe, is, like you mentioned that there's been some logistical issues and prices are coming up. Can we just cut back down to the core of why that is, just so people understand what's going on? Like, why does a virus cause logistical issues, and why does a virus cause price increases in their tub of protein, for example?
Okay, so there's a couple of moving parts here to unpack. I think on one side, you've got the increase in raw material prices. So let's park that over here and we'll come back to that. On the other side of things, you have the disruption to international freight. And let's kind of park that right here. And then the other thing you have are the change in values of different currencies. And so let's park that one over here. So there's really kind of three moving parts that are almost kind of joining in this delta at the moment to create the perfect storm that we're currently dealing with at the moment that's causing these quite rapid price rises. So if we go back to the first part, the increase in raw materials, most of the raw materials, especially amino acids, pretty much everything except for protein comes out of China for the most part. China at the moment, it depends politically what your opinion is on this, but the Chinese policy at the moment is to try and bring down their greenhouse gas emissions. So they're kind of putting under this umbrella of, we're doing this for climate change. We need to reduce the amount of greenhouse gas that we're emitting as a country. And we're doing that by reducing the amount of electricity that we produce using fossil fuels. So what's happened in China is your factories that are producing these raw materials are running at 20 to 50% capacity. So they're not actually able to produce the amount of raw materials that they were doing because of the government policy around climate change. So what that does is you have the same amount or even a greater amount of supply, greater amount of demand, you have less amount of supply. Basic economics, demand comes up, supply comes down. What happens to the price? The price of raw materials goes up. So you've got that happening from a raw material perspective that puts pressure on, what do we pay for a kilogram or a ton of creatine? What are we paying for a kilogram or a ton of acetyl-L-carnitine, or, name an ingredient, pop it in there, the price of that raw material comes up. Then you move to the second point, which is your international freight pressures. So this comes back to the very start of the pandemic, back 2 years ago to 2019, where it broke out in China and China went into lockdown and effectively the ports get shut, right? So all of your international sea freight, your ships will run certain lines around the world, depending on where your origin point is, where your destination point is, ships run certain lines. They don't just kind of go, we're going to decide how we get from the US to Australia, or from China to Australia, or from Australia to the Middle East. They run certain shipping lines. And when those shipping lines are locked down because the wharfs are closed, because the docks are closed, because they're trying to control pandemic, that has a flow-on effect that needs to be caught up. And with these continuous rolling lockdowns that we're seeing, started in China, obviously we've had more than we needed to here in Australia, that happened in the US, that happened all over the world. Every single time these lockdowns are happening, you're stopping that flow of shipping lines around the world. So you've got this continuous kind of catch up where the other thing is ships will go from, let's say a ship comes from the US down to Australia, through to China, back through the Middle East and back to the US. These ships are full of cargo the whole time. So they'll carry cargo from the US to Australia, drop it off, pick up a bunch of cargo in Australia, take it to China, drop it off, pick up a bunch of cargo in China, take it to the Middle East, drop it off. So these ships are not running empty. But when you've got these delays, you have containers sitting on docks in the US, in Australia, in China, in the Middle East, waiting for ships to be able to put this freight on so that they can go from the origin to the destination. So you have this continuous stop starting, which effectively reduces the overall shipping capacity, because if you've got a ship sitting in Port Melbourne for 4 weeks waiting to be unloaded because there's a lockdown and the wharfies are on strike because they don't want to get vaccinated, it sits there for 4 weeks when it should be traveling from Australia to China, or from Australia to the US, or wherever it should be. So you have pressure from the shipping perspective because you don't actually have the capacity to move freight around the world. So then people go, well, why don't you just put it on planes? Why don't you just use air freight? Well, then that's another problem as well, because most air freight cargo sits in the cargo holds of commercial flights, right? So if you hop on a flight from Sydney to Los Angeles, you put your suitcase in, you know, down and below, and you got your carry-on bag and whatever. Most of that cargo hold in the bottom of that plane is commercial freight. It's not freight from the passengers, it's commercial freight. So obviously we don't have a lot of flights going around the world internationally at the moment. So yeah, you can put certain things on planes to circumvent the problems with sea freight, but there's less capacity there. So if you want to do it, it's going to cost you more as well.
Well, then we end up with the supply demand thing again, right? So there's less air freight available.
Yep.
There's a lot of people who want it, and the price of getting something from bloody China to Australia right now is astronomical.
Well, it's unreal because there's nowhere to go, right? Like you can't, I mean, air freight is, in normal times, air freight is 10 to 15 times per kilogram more expensive than sea freight, right? So that has to be built into the landed cost of a product. Now it's blowing out to 20, 25, 30 times, depending on how much demand there is for that cargo hold space. So exactly right, Stu, it comes back to supply and demand, right? You've got demand for sea freight, you've got demand, increasing demand for air freight, you've got less capacity to supply sea freight, you've got much less capacity to supply air freight. So what happens to the price? The price goes up.
It's like usually you'll have in periods of history where you'll have you know, whether there's recessionary activity, whether you'll see one particular lever being pulled in terms of that might put a pressure on prices. There might be some inflationary policy. There might be some, like we said, you know, so it might be a given shortage of a material per se. It's really rare that you'll see such a perfect storm of all. It's like a multifactorial approach to price rises. Like it's not just the fact that we're pumping out an incredibly inflationary stimulus package ongoing. It's not just freight, you know, elongation as well. It's quite remarkable. And I think we're seeing that. I think consumers are starting to see hints of it in that they're going to a petrol station seeing unleaded for $2.09 a litre and so on. And but what's interesting in our space is that everyone's we hold our ground, I suppose, and we try not to pass that on to the consumer as much as we can. So there's this fixed ceiling. Manufacturing is going up. The retailers the wholesalers in between, they're going up, but retail doesn't budge. And it's a really unique space because every other industry just goes, okay, prices are up, put them up. Whereas we're in this really interesting space right now where I'm starting to see a really delicate dance between, I suppose, you know, more wholesalers and brands and distributors, going, well, this doesn't really quite make fiscal sense at the moment. But at the same point, there's also been, I mean, for years now, pre-work has been $69.95. That's we've never, since we had the good old in our Explode days for $120 tub, it's been $69 for quite a while. We've enjoyed a lot of fixed costs for our consumer, and we've had a very stable industry in that regard for a few years now. So I suppose you get to see it front of house as well as back of house. So where do you sort of predict? Do you think we'll see that upward pressure sort of reach the ceiling towards RRP bumping up for the end consumer? Or do you think we're probably at the tail end of this inflationary period of pricing and it might stabilize before it has to bump up the end point?
And to add to that as well, Joe, why do you think it is that as like, the retail side of supplements, why do you think it is that we don't increase our prices? Is that something to do with the fact that there's this common misconception that supplements are already hugely marked up? Like, why is it that a pre-workout is still $69.95 in 2021 and it was $69.95 in 2012? Like, it seems ridiculous, right?
Yeah, it's I probably have a slightly different view on this than I think probably most retailers have in the industry, Stu. The exclusive brands that we deal with in Massive Joe's, Core Nutritionals, First Form, just to name a couple, and always have been premium price products. So, from what I see, for the most part, we're generally the retailer that goes, you know what, this pre-workout needs to be $79.95. I remember when we had the first Fury X, I think we were the first retailer to sell a 20-serve pre-workout at $79.95 because from a pure business perspective, I knew what that was costing us to land. I knew what the margin was. I couldn't make it work at $69.95. It just didn't fit the business model. So I think from that perspective, I've always been quite comfortable being a first mover to push prices upwards. because I know how that plays out in terms of margin for a retailer. And I know that as a retailer, we can't operate a business the way that we want to operate a business on a 25% retail margin. It just doesn't work. We've been there, we've done that. I've got to an end of a financial year, seen these massive sales numbers, looked at the cost of goods, looked at the GP and seen what's left. And I've gone, oh shit. That doesn't cover my expenses the way that I'm running my business and the value I'm trying to give to the end consumer. So in that regard, I guess I've always been quite comfortable to be a first mover putting prices up. And that is relevant at the moment as well, because we have seen literally just in the last month, Optimum Nutrition have put our buy price with their products up. So I immediately went and I passed it on. I said, as a business, I need to make a margin. I need to make that margin to cover my expenses to stay in business. I can't absorb a 10 or a 15% increase in my buy price and keep the retail price the same. It's just not going to work.
See, I think that's good. That's good that you guys do that, though, because for me, as a smaller player in the game, when we see the bigger players in the game, it then gives justification to our customers as to why we've put our prices up. If they see, Stu with his two stores selling a bag of something for $10 more than everyone else, they get upset. Whereas if you go, hang on, look, Massive Joe's has done this. It kind of almost gives some more credence to it, or some more, so that helps us when the big guys are responding to the price rises. It definitely helps the little guys.
So that's what I found as the trend. Interestingly enough, it hasn't been the smaller businesses with the arguably leaner models to run. That it's been the biggest companies have been the first to put through these price rises. We've seen, Rural Ones, Optimum Nutrition, some of the biggest protein companies on the planet are the people who've come forefront. And it's interesting, I suppose, when you run such large businesses and you have multiple stakeholders and so on, you do have to consider the bottom line in a much more black and white way, I suppose, than when we're trying to work with a owner operator, sole trader who's trying to make sure his customers don't get it doesn't hit home with them as much as well. And it's interesting. I've seen the brands that I thought would have the most room to absorb or the scale to absorb potentially with the first come to the party, but I suppose that's also set the stage for smaller brands to go, well, look, to be fair, the biggest brands on the planet are putting it up 10, 15, 20% even, and we're coming in with 2.5 or 5, and so it's sort of like you said, Stu, it sort of validates the approach. But I just thought it was really, really worthwhile delving into some of the mechanics behind it, which is what was great there when we went through giving them an insight at the back end. And I think that's probably what a lot of people will see as this time around that we didn't see last year was that upward trend. I suppose last year that wasn't really on the cards, wasn't really a discussion. Everyone was we boomed, if anything. Well, the industry just exploded last year. This year too, I've seen a really strong surge again. Not quite as strong as last year, but I think to delve into the next section would be in terms of consumer trends and sales trends and how the industry is recovering this time around. Joe, what are you seeing? Similarities, differences. How's it been for you this time?
I think just before I jump to that question, I just want to close off the pricing discussion a little bit more, because there's something that is quite relevant at the moment as well. I think that a lot of retailers front of house are nervous to pass on price increases because the thought process around price elasticity is often, people think the elasticity of supplement prices are a lot more price elastic than they actually are. So if you put, your $100 tub of £5 whey up $10, it's going to significantly drop the amount of whey that you're going to sell. What I found from my experience is it doesn't. It really doesn't. I just don't think that a lot of supplements are as price elastic as we think they are as front of house retailers. So that's one side of that. I think the other side that I'm considering as well, and this is very prevalent at the moment because I literally got to HQ, I walked through the warehouse and I'm looking at empty aisles, of top selling products that we just put the price up on. So what I'm trying to balance as well is okay, my increase in cost price has gone up, so I need to pass that on to maintain my margin. I also know on this side that it's going to be a lot more difficult for me to get the volume of stock that I need. So I know there's going to be stock shortages. So I'm trying to balance, you know what, if I put prices up and there is a little bit of price elasticity and I lose a little bit of volume, it's actually not that big a deal because I can't get the stock to sell anyway. So that's a little bit of a balance for me as well, is kind of going, you know, I think I know where the price elasticity actually sits, not where I think it sits. I think I know actually where it sits because I got the data to back it up. And I'm happy to push that a little bit because I know that, you know what, if nobody has a 5-pound tub of raw one-way blend, people will pay what they want to pay for it. Right. And that's what we're looking at the moment and that's a perfect example. We literally put the price up on that product, right? We did notice a small drop off in volume, but I can't get the stock to fulfill what I'm selling at the increased price anyway.
Remarkable. And are you finding that as a trend across both regular consumables, like we'd call protein powders, greens, those sort of things, or things that people use as staples, and it's pretty much built into their daily routine or meal plans or what have you? Is that transient as well to other sort of categories, mate? Are you seeing that with, if, for example, you know, actually, this is a good one for you because you're right. You sold the earliest stuff. You had the earliest pre's that were 79. Like the core range has always been, you know, premium product for a premium price point. So you've seen both ends. So are you seeing? Do you think that particular model where the I suppose increasing that recommended retail for the consumer, do you see that translate across things outside of the consumables like a protein and staples? Are you seeing that too in other areas?
Yeah, pretty much across the board. Much across the board. Even now, and you would see this from a manufacturing perspective, Will, even your raw commodities, you know, like we've just had that massive increase in the raw material price of creatine monohydrate. Right? So huge. Like what do we do? We're stuck between a rock and a hard place. It's a cheap, low margin product already. There's not a lot of space to absorb anything. So, all right, we put the price up, people still buy it, and then we can't fulfill the demand at the increased price.
It's remarkable. I sat there with my accountant the other week and I was bashing my head against the wall because I'm going, like, and I had the conversation with retailers before, just out of interest, which is really cool because I think more so than ever, it's almost made people think, I don't want to say more business-minded in general, not that they aren't already, but I think it's made people look at their business a lot closer, which is probably something that's I suppose, I mean, I definitely wasn't as across it as I am now, but if there is a blessing in disguise for all this, it's made a lot of retailers really look at their bottom line closely and start making more sensible decisions. And it's also helped bolster Aussie trade, which is what I'm really liking lately. I'm seeing a lot of Aussie independent brands kicking goals now because there's just no other option, for one. And two, obviously, we've had some time around the block, so consumers recognise the qualities there with Australian manufacturing. But I'm seeing now also businesses are going, hey, we've got all these, we're starting to see some shortage of supply. We're starting to see some increases in price in the big players internationally as well. Why don't we turn our gaze more inward and see what we can do domestically? And I'm hoping that's a trend that happens as a flow on ongoing. We see more support of Australian manufacturing and you know, I think that would be a really nice silver lining, if nothing else, from this whole storm that's happened, you know.
Joe, on that one, I've got a question for you. And this is, I guess, around entrepreneurship and businesses starting up. And I guess it ties back into a little bit of what you were talking about before, Will, where there's certain amount of risk involved that some people aren't willing to take, you know. And I'd be interested to know if, Joe, you feel that it is riskier now for a business person to make big moves, or was it something that's riskier pre-pandemic, or, you know, is this a great time for people to be hanging the balls on the chopping block, so to speak, or is it a terrible time to be doing that?
Stu, loaded question, man. Very, very loaded question. Look, you know, when the pandemic, so I have a couple of different trains of thought around this. When the pandemic first hit, you know, March, April, May last year, I did a couple of episodes of the Fitness Times Business podcast, and I kind of coined this term as the exposure pandemic. And what I said was, you know, so many people who have an entrepreneurial streak, or so many people who have, you know, things that they want to pursue, things that they want to do. Perhaps they, you know, they're sick of the 9-to-5 grind. They want to start their own thing. They want to explore this, but they've always had excuses for not doing it, right? It was this excuse, or it was that excuse, or, you know, whatever. And I said that the pandemic was exposing all of those excuses, because, you know, the excuse, I don't have time. Well, now you've got the time and you're still not doing anything about it. The excuse of, you know, I've got the golden handcuffs on. For a lot of people, they were taken off, right? And so what's your excuse? And so I kind of, you know, use that to go, this is the perfect time to go and take that risk, because all of the bullshit excuses that you've been using over the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years have now been taken off the table. The whole world's on pause. It's a clean slate. There's going to be no better time in your lifetime to go and take that risk that you wanted to take, to go and pursue your entrepreneurial dream or your entrepreneurial streak. So that's that. As the pandemic has progressed, I think I probably speak for all of us when I don't think that back in March and April last year, we thought we'd be sitting here at the end of 2021 still dealing with pandemic related issues. You know, I remember when the government came out, it was like the flatten the curve, the 6-month thing, we'll get on top of this shit and then everything will go back to quote unquote normal. And here we are 18 months later, and it feels like we're right at the beginning of dealing with all of the economic issues that have been created by pumping all of this money into the economy, by locking cities down for extraordinarily long periods of time with not a whole lot of justification. And I'm going to stop before I start getting too political, but you know,
we love it, Joe.
but you know, but here we are dealing with all of this shit. And so, you know, I think now if I was to revisit that train of thought that I had where it was like, you know what, exposure pandemic, all of your bullshit excuses have been taken off the table. Now, 18 months in, I think that what we're really seeing is who are the really good entrepreneurs now? You know, who has the actual real entrepreneurial skill set to identify problems, solve problems, pivot from things that they thought were working to now things that aren't working in a very short period of time, and really actually able to make those very difficult decisions. And with that in mind, I think that if you don't have a lot of entrepreneurial experience, it's probably going to be much more difficult now to get something off the ground than it was, say, 18 months ago.
Yeah, but I'll tell you what I think there's also more of an opportunity for risks to pay off on a much bigger scale because of the inflationary environment we're in as well. So for an example, we see an exponential boom in sales each time we get let out. That just seems, and admittedly it's only a 2-year trend, so it's a very short period of data to sort of play with, right? But each time we've seen a bit of a pattern now. Sales dampen, sales boom, sales stay booming, and then, you know, eventually level off. It seems to be going quite strongly this time. So for example, in my business model, I went the opposite way, and I went, okay, I'm predicting this is going to be quite strong in the short term. If I start gearing up now, it'll pay off soon. And I probably sunk in more than I'd ever want to put into stock in a time when I wasn't selling a great deal of stock. But now that we're out of the gates, business grew probably 70% in a very short time. So you sort of, I would say that yes, the risk is in a much more unstable environment, but the payoff is also significantly higher because in a lot of areas, it's sort of, the growth is astronomical as well. So it's sort of, if you're willing to spot the gaps or predict or hedge your bets a little, I think you get a bigger reward than you would historically in a different time setting as well. So admittedly, it's, you know, you still have to have that little bit of just, you know, sheer dumb luck to an extent, but just go, you know what, this could really sink me, but I'll have a go. That's always there, good times or bad. But I don't know, I've just seen a really astronomical, like, some people have had some really interesting ideas, they've run with it, and it's just gone boom, like it's just exploded because the environment's there to allow things, like to allow it as well. Obviously, some businesses didn't fare as well. If you're in, you know, certain industries right now, it's the opposite story. But I don't know. I just think there's a pretty big payoff if you know, at the moment with things skyrocketing as they do each time coming out of these things.
Will,
I think. Go ahead, Stu.
I was going to say, you know, Will, I really like just listening to you talk and knowing that you're somebody who's entrepreneurial and what you do. I don't think that the people will grasp the magnitude of the amount of risk that that people like yourself and like Joe and like myself to an extent take on a regular basis. So, you know, we talk about jumping off the cliff and taking that risk, taking that leap. And usually that's referring to having that go and making that startup, all right? But people don't realize that, I think some people don't realize that during the process of growing that business, it's not just like put your balls on the chopping block and play a bit of Russian roulette with it for the startup period. You have to leave the balls on the chopping block and have that, meat cleaver there, chopping many, many times over through this process of growing a business. And it's, I don't think that every personality type can do that, because there is going to be a level of anxiety that you need to live in order to make something really work. Would you agree with that, Joe?
Mate, I couldn't have said it better myself, to be honest. The analogy that you use with balls on the chopping block, just to add something to that, the knife gets bigger and the amount of cuts that you take on a daily basis increases as well.
It's remarkable, isn't it? You're jumping off the cliff at the start, and then there's every day there's a cliff. And you're just like, wow, these don't really let up. There's constantly twists and turns. Like you get your place to it, get the business to a good point. Oh, price rise. Okay, shit. All right, I'll rejig everything, redo that. TJ law changes. Oh, cool. Okay, let's work with that. Oh, lockdown. Oh, okay, cool. And just go on and on and on. And you've really, I think it's just being a punching bag at one point. At one point, you've just got to be able to just take a disgusting volume of just punishment over a significant period and learn how to cope with disgusting stress, or you won't get through it, because you'll just end up an anxious wreck on the floor. It's almost like just endurance of stress is probably the main determining factor in business success. How long can you endure anxiety and stress? That'll probably see you out more than most. That's really the main thing too,
is that with each opportunity that presents itself, you tend to have to wager a bigger portion of what you've already built, which is scary. But if you're not willing to do it, you can't actually take that step. So, I look at Elon Musk, and I remember listening to him on a podcast talking about when he started SpaceX, and he basically had to put his fortune on the line to start SpaceX, which was like probably a move that none of the three of us could have ever made, potentially, I don't know, but, with each new opportunity that presents itself, the risk becomes greater, and, the potential to lose more of this little thing you've already built up, it becomes very real. And I think that's very interesting as well, because you think, oh, well, at least I'm off that cliff now. But the next cliff that you look at is not smaller than the cliff before, but in actual fact, it's larger.
Well, this would be a good one as a segue then. Let's run with that. So I'm in, I think Prime is year 6 now. Stu, you're about a decade in, I'm pretty sure. And Joe, you're like 15, 16 years or so, Joe. So we're sort of 5, 10, 15 year rooms between the three of us. I suppose being the longest server in the room, what do you sort of pay into that thought process, the ongoing trials and tribulations and so on, how they augment over time as business matures? What trends have you noticed as you've gone through business, Joe? How has that sort of evolved? Is it the same scale of risk? Is it more? Is it less? Is it just smaller ones more often? How have you found business evolve in the more as it's unfolded the last decade and a half?
Yeah, it's a great question, Will. And I think, definitely as I've kind of matured in business and as I've spent more time in business, and we mentioned in the podcast that we did, the Fitness Times Business podcast, the concept of these different rooms, 5-year room, 10-year room, 15, 20. I think probably when I was younger and newer to business, I had the misconception that as you get deeper into business, it gets easier. It doesn't. It gets more difficult. And exactly, as you kind of use the analogy, Stu, the cliffs get bigger. I think what happens, though, is you develop the skills to be able to confront them. You develop the skills to be able to confront the cliffs and figure out how to tackle them. You can't, I don't want to say you can't, but there's very few people who will have developed the skills in their first 5 years of business to go and tackle 15-year business problems or 25-year business problems. It's part of this building skills as you go through different business experience, where you actually you become a better entrepreneur. You become a better businessman. You develop the skills of mindfulness and stress management and anxiety management and prioritization and execution and, all of these skills that are required to get into that next room. The challenges get more difficult, the risks get bigger, the amount that you have on the line becomes greater, but you also at the same time develop the skills to be able to deal with that. That's kind of my experience at this point, and it gives me a lot of respect, and it gives me great admiration for people who are in the 20-year room or the 25-year room or the 30-year room, because I'm like, well, I've seen what it's taken for me to get into the 15-year room, and you motherfuckers are on a completely different level. And it tends to be exponential as well. So the difference between the 15 and the 20.
You look at the Grant Mayo and the these sort of guys.
Yeah, and you see what they've gone through. I mean, I think, but and even to I suppose follow a similar curve. What I found interesting, though, there is one silver lining in that there seems to be a bit of a point where I think just being around on the block long enough, also you tend to snowball some momentum as well, depending on whether you've done your job, whether you've perfected your craft well enough and you've delivered your value and you've given the service that you intended to when you started, providing you keep that with some integrity and keep it going. There also was a certain point that I've noticed where just skin in the game and time in the game also just builds momentum of its own accord. And business does get, when I say the business as a whole, operationally doesn't get easier, but sales come easier, I would say.
Well, I disagree with that. I think that that's been your experience because you're an incredibly hard worker and you don't realize that you have a superhuman work ethic, because I've seen people who try at something for a long time and fail without that snowball effect ever happening because they cannot put in the groundwork. They can't hit the pavement like you do. So I don't think that you actually realize, and, I'm not trying to blow your head up or anything, but I think that you put in a lot more work into your business than I'm going to say most entrepreneurs do, or people who claim to be entrepreneurs. I think that snowball effect is a result of effort compounded day in, day out. And that's really what you're seeing. I think that you're putting it down to the fact that you're just hanging around the industry for long enough that the snowball grows. But really, it's the cumulative buildup of you getting in the car and being on the road, driving from town to town, basically across Australia, calling your accounts, once or twice a week to check in on them, even if you know that they don't need any stock, just to ask how business has been. It's all those things that you're doing that's creating that snowball. And for me personally, I don't believe that it's just hanging about. I don't think does really too much for anyone if they're not doing those things that you're doing. Would you agree with that, Joe? Or
100%. And that's kind of, I guess that's the missing piece of when I talk about the developing the skills to be able to climb the bigger cliffs. It doesn't just happen, right? It's not just, I'm just going to hang around until I'm in the 15-year room.
Just show up.
You do have to show up, right? The first step. But you actually have to do the work as well. And I think that part of that skill development is confronting the uncomfortable, right? Part of that skill development is doing the difficult shit where other people will go, it's too uncomfortable, it's too difficult. I'm just going to sit, fold my arms and hope that shit happens. And I think that, when you talk about the momentum wheel, it's really momentum in being able to confront uncomfortable situations. It's momentum in being able to do difficult things, because when you build the skill of coming up against a brick wall, and instead of going, you know what, I'm going to turn around and go in the other direction, you build the skill of going, all right, am I going to go over it? Am I going to go under it? Am I going to go around it? Or am I just going to fucking smash through it? Right? Those skills develop the momentum of confronting difficult situations, of confronting uncomfortable situations. That then develops the skills for you to be able to go and climb those bigger cliffs and figure out how to get through those bigger brick walls. So I agree with Stu 100%.
I want to give an example there too of a time when you've actually probably done more than what someone else would do, Will, and maybe not understanding the magnitude of the situation. But I remember this was quite some time ago. I got sent a Promobolics order. There was a fairly big mistake made in the order due to one of your packers or whoever you have up there packing the boxes. And I was pretty upset about it. Now it wasn't a huge order, but for me as a small business, I was I was a bit upset about it, and I let you know that. And you jumped in the car, packed the products that I needed in your car, and drove down from Newcastle to Wollongong, which is 2.5, 3 hour drive, Will?
Yeah, 3.5-ish, yep.
3.5 hour drive to make sure that I had the stock. Now, that order wasn't enormous. It might have been a, $1,000 order, but you galvanized the relationship at that point through doing that. And I was like, holy crap, this guy is different. I don't know anyone who would drive 3.5 hours for $1,000 order just to make sure that the client is happy. And so now that's grown into, regular, every couple of weeks, 3.5 grand orders, or, whatever it is. And that's through some of those things that you've done. Now, you could have lost an account on that $1,000 order and just gone, oh, well, it's just another account. But you don't do that. You put in the effort, and you put in that 3.5 hour drive. That 3.5 hour drive is the thing that 95% of people don't do and won't do. And I think that really is the secret to the snowball that you've experienced.
I appreciate it. It's also flipped my perspective now when you guys say it like that, because I put it down to that. I thought, if you just doing good things long enough, it'll end up having its own, I suppose, business karma, and it sort of builds its own little freight train, so to speak. But I suppose when you flip it, you go, well, actually, through at that time, it wasn't just showing up each day, punching the ticket, and going home. I suppose, is it really? You've got to, like you said, develop the skills, Joe. And I find that quite an interesting concept. You know what? You've opened my eyes on that one a little bit. Maybe it's not just punching the ticket for just hold on as long as you can.
Well, I think it's important for the listeners and the viewers, in business or thinking about going into business, to hear that as well, right? Because you can kind of fall into this misconception, like you say, Stu, where you put your balls on the chopping block at the beginning, and and that's the risk, and then you just you sit back and wait for shit to happen. I've seen many times. We've seen the success stories, like, the stories you just gave about Will there, Stu, but I've seen the flip side as well. I've seen people in the supplement business, outside of the supplement business, who, have been doing it for 10 years, have been doing it for 15 years, and should be in these rooms that we talk about, but they haven't done the work. They haven't confronted the uncomfortable. They haven't gone through the difficult shit. And they're exactly where they were 10 or 15 years ago, right? With those same balls on the same chopping block with the same knife. So,
it's almost a sign of you've done your job well if that gets bigger. If all the risks get bigger and the scale gets bigger, because that's implying that you've grown, and ergo your business has grown, ergo the risks your business must take have grown. Which in itself is an interesting concept. And I think if nothing else, I think that's probably the ability to pivot is something that I think that's been, I suppose, really rewarded, which is great to see lately. I think the businesses who have moved fast, let's just pick just going for this with latest trends we're seeing. For example, the whole Turkish around massive inflation interest around that, for example. Now that's an area where certain brands pivoted really fast, and you see times like this in the industry where there'll be a particularly usually short-lived but intense sort of interest or area of and the demand there, and few businesses pivot really fast, just make it happen. And then other ones might we'll ride it out, wait 6-12 months and go for it. And, I suppose whether you're a fan of this ingredient or not, it's just also interesting. I see that as a trend. I think the ability to pivot, if nothing else, has really shone lately with a lot of people. I find the businesses who are really kicking ass now didn't sit on their hands before. I think they really, they adapted throughout and ongoing. So in your term now, in that 15-year room, I suppose, what would you say is your, the thing you're most grateful you've developed skills wise in your that's really carrying you through now? What are you most grateful you put the work in and developed as a skill set that you picked up to get you to this point in the game?
Building people instead of building a business, for sure. That's been something that definitely over the last couple of years has been a big focus of mine. And definitely has helped us through what has been the most rapidly changing, most uncomfortable business period that I've ever experienced. And what I mean by that is, you can build a business to a certain point on the back of your own effort and your own investment and your own skill set. But when you get to a certain glass ceiling and you're trying to get through it, or when you get to a certain room and you're trying to get to the next room, you can't do it by yourself. You need people, you need team, you need company culture, you need, all of these kind of buzzwords that are used in the corporate environment, but ring incredibly true. You need to invest in your people. You need to build your people's confidence. You need to build your people's skill set. You need to take everything that you've learned in the 5-year room, the 10-year room, the 15-year room, and start to impart that on people in your team so that you can then hand the reins over for a particular part of the business to them, right? And go, you know what? I need you to go and run the retail store network. I need you to go and run the distribution network. I need you to take care of the international logistics. I need you to take care of the cash flow and the finance. I need you to take care of dispatching online orders. I need you to take care of the customer service. And you can start to delegate out to your team and have the faith and the trust in them to go and do that job to the best of their abilities, which hopefully is to the best of your abilities if you've trained them correctly. And then that frees you up to then go and pursue getting through that glass ceiling, go and pursue the next business initiative, go and pursue the next growth initiative. So
that's fascinating, mate. That's probably the best way I've heard that put, because I think this is something that a lot of listeners will hit home on, because once you get, a lot of our listeners are established retail store owners, they're established, coaches. We've had a really great broad, I guess, range of guests on, and I suppose they all are at different stages in their own business life maturity. But something that's interesting there, I suppose, and really hard, particularly for myself, to do, is the delegation part, or when to know when you're your own ceiling. I hit my own ceiling recently, and I find it quite interesting as a concept, because you become your own handbrake. And I never thought I'd be my own. You always go, oh yeah, when you start, you're like, cool, the sky's the limit. I'm going to run it this as hard as I can. We're going to grow. And it does. And you take on more and more responsibility. You do more and more and more and more. And then you get to a point where you're like, I'm maxed out. Shit, I'm now choking my own business. This thing could well outdo me if I had the right people around to do it. But you still have that mindset when you started, and that same personal element of it where it's your baby, your project, and it's also so hard to hand the reins over. So when did you, I suppose, twig that mindset and go, okay, I need to hand these reins over? Was it a forced thing where you just had the workload just got unrealistic, or was it you sort of saw down the track a little and went, hey, this is on a trajectory I can't quite, I can't control this? What happened for you?
Can I just roll one thing into that question for you as well, Joe? Sorry, I know we like to give you these double questions just to keep you on your toes, mate. But you've got a lot of media experience, so you can handle this kind of pressure.
I got this.
We're pretty, we interrogate quite hard here. But on top of Will's question, is there a trait or a part of the business that you will never give to someone else? Is there something that you feel should always be your role and will always be your role that you won't delegate, or you feel that other business owners shouldn't delegate?
Yeah, 100%. I'll answer that question first, Stu, because it's quite an easy one for me to answer, and that's company vision. I think as the founder of a company, as the owner of a company, as the leader of a company, you can't delegate the vision of where you're heading as a company to somebody else. You have to own that 100%. And as you get, deeper into your business journey, more of your time needs to be invested in that and driving that company vision towards how you see it manifesting. So I think that that's the thing that can never and should never be delegated, or else it's not your company anymore, right? You may as well sell it or give it to somebody else and say, you go deal with it. Back to your question, Will, I think it's been a combination of a couple of things. I think in the first instance, it was exactly like you've spoken about, as I got to a point where I was my own handbrake. I got to the point where I was choking my own business growth ability. And probably the first part of that was retail stores. When I got to, I'm going to say it was like 4 or 5 retail stores, I went back to the drawing block, because I was like, this is not working anymore. I was doing all the rostering, I was doing all of the stock control, I was doing all of the training, all of the visual merchandising, similar to what I assume you're doing with your couple of stores, Stu, right? You do everything.
Yeah.
And that was fine, for the first store, the second store, the third store. I think it was the 4th actually. And then we opened the 5th quite closely after that. is I was like, it's impossible for me to continue to do this. So that was probably the first time where I identified that I was my own handbrake, and went back to the drawing board and said, okay, we need to restructure this. I need to bring in a retail store operations manager, which was Leah, my sister, to run this. And then this is how we're going to train people. These are the systems we're going to put in place for how the stores are merchandised, how the stores are run. And you've seen it firsthand, Will. You go into a Massive Joe's retail store, the experience is exactly the same across all of them. And that's just part of the processes and the procedures that have been put in place back it was 2015. So that was the first thing. I think then the second thing after that was the distribution side of the business. Similar situation. I got to a point where I was running, similar to yourself, Will, right? Like I'm running orders to individual accounts. I'm on the phone, I'm ringing people, I'm getting back to emails, I'm doing the new customer acquisition, I'm dealing with the suppliers on the partnership end, and it was just too many things. So, at that point I was like, okay, well, I need to bring somebody in now and get them to run that side of the business, the distribution side of the business, or the wholesale side of the business. So that there was definitely a bunch of those that kind of happened. I think the biggest thing for me though was when I started delegating, and I came to the realization that I actually hadn't invested what I needed to invest in those people who I was delegating to give them the skills, the confidence, the ability to run that side of the business the way that I needed it run, to the standard that I needed it run to. That was the big awakening for me, because I was like, okay, I've got this delegation thing, I've got this baseline training thing, I've got the awareness of when I'm putting my own handbrakes on, but I made, and I'm 100% happy to own this, right? I'll never point the finger at anybody else, but I made a lot of mistakes where I handed over the reins to certain people in the business that didn't have the skills, the training, the confidence, the know-how to meet the standard that I needed met for that particular part of the business. And so what happened to those particular parts of the business? Well, they start to slip, right? And then I'm like, oh shit, now I've got to go back in and fix this. Okay, how do I make sure this doesn't happen again moving forward? Well, I actually have to invest in building my people rather than trying to build a business.
That's fascinating. That's a different angle altogether, because you're right. I've had this exact struggle recently where I've just started, trying to put on a sales team to support me, for example, and hired someone who's quite new to the game. And you find that you're so buried in work that you often you might not touch base for 3-4 days at a time. And then then at the end of the month, you go, oh, there's this big disparity in results. And I suppose the easy road is to go, why can't they do this? Why can't they do this? Or what have you? And that's a really good message for people at home to own it. That's on me. I need to provide that training. Or if you're running a business and you have a certain area that isn't being run as it is, it's just a lack of a skill set not yet developed. And if you're the one that has the skill set, I suppose that's really cool how you put it. You almost have an obligation to pass that on as a bit of a knowledge set legacy, I suppose, to try and keep it going in your absence. Because you can't, I suppose, get someone who hasn't been in any of the rooms we've spoken about prior to jump in and run it at the scale that it is now, for example, and just expect it to do so. That's a pretty interesting point in itself. I often find it quite, I suppose too, because I think a lot of us in this industry, it's quite nice. A lot of stores that I deal with being small to medium independents, they didn't always expect it to go where it went to. In most cases, I think most was probably the same. Most of us started from a garage, so you don't sort of look forward and go, oh yeah, well I expect to be here as a 7-figure company. You expect this to happen. As you don't. You just go, oh yeah, I'm going to have a crack at this, and hopefully I don't end up, homeless. Again, in my case,
sometimes you do end up homeless for a period of time.
Yeah.
I know you were living in a warehouse for a bit there, Will.
Yeah, man, I had a full quarter in that warehouse. That was the summer. Yeah, that was fun. But it's all right. I should say I'll rephrase that. Be homeless again. So we'll try in that way. So I think as you go through through those phases and train up the people around you, I think that's a really good take home though for people at home to go. If you when it is growing and we don't see it always evolving, you sort of also have to have in the back of your mind as it grows and you want some support systems, you probably have to have some responsibility around making those support systems actually viable support systems, and not just, hey, hot potato, deal with this and just hope it works, which is our temptation, because we're all time poor and we're all stressed out of our brains, right? So we're all like, quick, just handle this, please, God. I haven't got any more in me. Just sort it. So did you make that a purposeful thing when you say invest in people around you? To clarify that, because I think people at home, this would be a really good thing for listeners. a lot of them having employees under them, a lot of them being supplement store owners, being brand owners, being distributors. They have people who are there, who sort of report to them and so on. So did you make that would you recommend to these listeners, did you make that a purposeful thing? Was that actually a scheduled thing where you invested in people's training per se? Was it more osmotic where people just sort of absorbed, just being in the environment? How do you approach investing in the people around you?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things practically, a couple of pieces of practical advice that I kind of use and I'm happy to share, right? So the first thing is I meet with all of my direct reports on, we have a full meeting on a monthly basis, and then we have a check-in on a fortnightly basis. And the full monthly meeting is, how did you go last month? KPI review, right? So these are your KPIs. This is what we're trying to achieve. How did you stack up against them? And then we take a deep dive, right? If you did well, why did you do well? If you missed it, why did you miss it? Is there something you need help with? Is there something you need training with? Like, this is your opportunity to have a very open and honest, vulnerable conversation with me about where you're at, where I need you to get to, and how we get you to that point. Then we go through, all right, what do you need help with from other areas of the business? Because all different parts of the business, as much as we try and silo, everything is interconnected, as you guys are well aware. So from other areas of the business, what do you need help with? How can I assist you? What do you need help with from me personally, right? Do I need to spend more time training you on this particular skill? Do I need to spend more time side by side as you're going and approaching accounts? Do I need to spend, you tell me, like, how can I assist you? What do you need me personally to do, right? And then it's about, what does your task list look like? Like, what are you actually working on? Let me make sure that the way you're investing your time on a daily basis is moving towards where I need you to move towards to achieve these certain KPIs, but at the same time, to make sure that you're developing as a person, right? That you're developing your career, you're developing your skill set, you're developing your experience. I don't want you to just stay in the same position and kind of spin your wheels. That doesn't bring me fulfillment. That doesn't bring you fulfillment. It's not going to help us reach our business growth goals either. So what does that look like? So I think that the communication piece is a really big one. And it's something that, I've been doing that for the last couple of years now. And before that, I didn't do that. It was kind of like monthly KPI check-in. How did you go? All right, you did well, you didn't do well. And that's kind of the end of it.
Yeah.
Try better next month,
Yeah, look, that's
and
fair
then
too.
I think, just to kind of round that out with these check-ins, right, is we actually have a period where it's I don't want to say gloves are off because we're not boxing each other, but it's it's no holds barred, right? I'm going to tell you what I think you're doing well, and I'm going to tell you what I think you're dropping the ball on, right? And I call it constructive criticism. So I have a place in our meetings where you're going to expect me to give you constructive criticism, and I'm going to give it to you, right? And I'm going to be as candid as I can be because I'm trying to help you get better. And then I expect you to do the same thing, right? You give me constructive criticism. What do you need from me? Where am I dropping the ball as a leader? What can I do better to help you progress as a person, to help you progress in your position, to help you progress in your career and continue to level up? So I think that communication piece and building a culture where people feel comfortable having those uncomfortable conversations is a really big part of it. Because I think sometimes you can fall into the culture of, I'm too afraid to tell my boss about this, or I'm too afraid to, it's the fixed mindset, growth mindset thing. I'm too afraid to say that I don't know how to do this because that might be shoved back down my throat and I might be disciplined for not having the skills, when really I'm putting my hand up and saying, listen, I need a bit of help because I actually don't know how to do this. And that's going to be encouraged, and that's going to be used as a catalyst for developing more skills and developing more training.
Remarkable. Yeah, right. The fixed versus growth mindset. I want to see how that translates right back to the very start. We were talking about, let's flow that onto, because this is one part that we didn't unpack that I think would be something that we'd be remiss to not cover. I think tying that in with the being afraid to, for example, increase your end price point for a consumer. Let's apply this to that scenario. I guess you could take that same mindset that you just did to the having the hard conversations, or having that more expansive mindset towards that scenario, then I suppose you could in this scenario where like the retailer might be concerned they'll lose sales if they increase price. But I suppose that's a limited mindset, and they're going, well, that's the only thing they're offering their customer is a price point on a given product, right? What about all the extra stuff you can do? Helping with meal plans, helping with, like how's your sleep, how's your nutrition, what other services are you offering? What other value do you bring to the table? Is that not worth an extra $5 a tub? And I suppose that's an interesting way we could look at that. Is not, and I think that's probably something you've built into your sort of brand culture quite a bit. And I think probably a lot of people listening, if they were just starting out their journey, would probably walk away with a pretty awesome life lesson. When did you, I suppose, was that something purposeful where you at the start sat down and went, I'm going to build a business that just puts out shit tons of content and educates the hell out of people and hope that translates later on? Was that organic, or was that like from the beginning where you went, I'm going to do this as a purposeful thing? Because I think a lot of people might be missing that piece of the puzzle. I think they stock a product and they go, people will want this product, they will come to me to buy it. That's as far as it really goes. So for you, how did that even unfold?
Well, it's a slight difference in how you kind of pose the question, Will, right? So in one hand, you can pose the question and say, the problem I'm trying to solve is, how do I sell more product, right? That's it. Closed, fixed, right? How do I sell more products? And then that's going to lead to, spending more on marketing, advertising, price elasticity, dropping the price, doing discounts, blah, 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 whatever that kind of leads to. So that's one way of asking the question. The other way of asking the question is, how do I help people improve their lives by providing them the products to do so? So the slight nuance there is focusing on the customer rather than focusing on the product. So the customer comes first. I'm going to help you. The problem I'm trying to solve is your problem, right? I'm trying to help you improve your life. The problem I'm trying to solve is not my problem, which is how do I sell more products? I'm focused on you in the first instance. How do I help you improve your life through health and fitness? And then let me provide the products to help you do that. So I think that's the difference, and it does kind of apply to fixed and growth mindset, right? The fixed mindset is, how do I sell more products? The growth mindset is, how do I solve people's problems? And then provide them the products to do that. So that's kind of how I think about it. That's it's one of these things that has been inherent right from when I started the business. And I think that, all three of us have a consumer background, right? We're all supplement junkies, right? We love our pre-workouts and our proteins and this and that. And I think coming from that background, we're all inherently consumer focused. We're all inherently people problem focused. So for me, that's always been something that I've held as a big motivator and a big company mission driver for me. And it's something that I've gotten a lot better at communicating to my team. Look, this is what we do, and this is why we do what we do, right? What we do is we're trying to help people improve their lives through health and fitness by providing products, by providing experiences and providing information. Why do we do that? Because we all know the positive effects that that's had on our life, right? We've seen the improvement in our quality of life through going to the gym, through living the health and fitness lifestyle, for dieting correctly, through understanding macronutrient intake, through taking supplements that help us perform better and feel better and do all of these amazing things. That's the why behind it. But I think to come back to your question, it's what's the problem I'm trying to solve? Is it the customer's problem or is it my problem? If it's the customer's problem, you're going to think completely differently with a growth mindset. If it's your problem, you're going to think fixed mindset, and it's all about trying to peddle more products.
Yeah, and I think that like those of us who have come from being, supplement junkies back in the day, little gym rats, I think we probably find it a little bit easier to put on the customer's shoes, and that's what I tell my staff is I want you to really remember what it's like to go into one of these stores and remember why you're going in. When you walk into a supplement store, or when you go to, into one of Joe's stores, or you go onto the Promobolics website, you're actually not there shopping for food. You're shopping for results. You're shopping for some muscle growth. You're shopping for some fat loss. You're shopping for some faster recovery. And even to the consumer, like if I remember myself as a young, landscape apprentice, The cost was not really what I was so concerned about. What I was so concerned about was, will this really help me grow? And if I could be convinced that it would, and then the product delivered that, I was happy to pay whatever for it, really. So for the consumer, even, I don't think cost is as big of a factor as we would like to believe that it is. And I've noticed this in myself because, as you know, Will, I do what I call client consults. So when a customer comes in, it's not just walk in, grab a tub, pay and leave. I ask them a few questions about their training style, about their life, about their diet, about, I literally sit there and write it down with them. And then we try and assess what they're trying to achieve. And I have no problems coming back to the counter with 4 products for them after that. But I've found that people who are new to my store, especially ones who I've gotten from other stores, are really uncomfortable doing a $300, $400 or $500 sale because they feel as though it's a lot to spend, and they project that onto the customer and then the customer starts getting a little hasty. But if you bring it back to how can I most help you? Hey, that might be 1 product, but it might be 4, and the customer is just as happy to grab the 4 if you've, convinced them of the value in this and how it's going to help them. They don't bat an eyelid at the price. And I think assuming that the customer is going to be put off by price is the biggest mistake you can make in a retail store.
I'll probably do it too, to be fair. I'm probably guilty of that myself, I'd say. I think it's also because historically it's been broke forever. But I think that's also I've been very price conscious myself because I've just always been flat broke. So I think that's probably, but I do that as well. I'll sit and I was very price point focused just out of necessity. But I'll admit that's probably been a limitation on my end. You sort of preempt what the customer's perceived spend point might be. In my end, it might be slightly larger being B2B, but it's still the same sort of concept, right? And that's probably a worthwhile take-home, Stu, is look more at the perceived value of your service than what you might otherwise conceive the relevant pricing. That's quite a good way of looking at it, and it might help people have a bit more of an more expansive mindset towards what they're offering as a business. I suppose that's a pretty good solid take-home, man.
Yeah, definitely. I think we might wrap it up there, guys. I think we've had an awesome episode. Joe, you've given us a heap of your time, and we really do appreciate it. I know you're a busy man and you've got a lot of different facets of your company to run, but I really do appreciate you coming on for a second episode, mate. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you, Stu. Thank you, Will. It's been a great chat. It's been I always love sitting down with you guys. I get to talk supplement business talk that I don't get to do too often. So I really appreciate you guys inviting me back on, and I appreciate the opportunity as well.
And thanks so much, Will, as well, for all your insights today. I know you love the Joseph Mencel episodes because he's been a hero of yours for many years. So
Indeed,
this is really your jam. But no, thanks so much for everything today as well, Will.
Absolute pleasure, mate. Well, thanks for listening, guys, as always. Hope we'll keep these episodes rolling out over the coming weeks. Try and deliver as much value as we can. So thanks for listening thus far. And until next time, guys, we'll leave it at that.